You just got back from Ukraine a week ago. You've been there how many times now?
7 times.
7 times. But you really have focused particularly on the agricultural aspect of it, because that's what you do in your foundation. Agriculture, food security, as well as concern about conflict. What do you know?
Well, I think that, when the war started, it was obvious to me that it was going to have a global impact. And so people talk about global food security, but a lot of times you don't break that down. So if you look at it today, we're going to have the largest shortage in rice that we've had in 20 years. Argentina, they had a late frost and then a drought, so their corn production on their trend years is going to be down probably 15%, soybeans maybe 35%, wheat 25%. China's talking about, they're not going to ship any more fertilizer. So the trickle-down effect of Ukraine trickle is an understatement. I mean, it's going to have a huge impact, and that lasts. You can't just bring things back quickly and right away. And so I think, what I've seen in Ukraine is just incredible devastation in terms of the war and its impact on not just agriculture, but across the board. But Ukraine has suffered a lot in their agricultural sector, and it's got to be one of the primary areas that we focus on in terms of bringing Ukraine back.
So, Howard, they talk about Ukraine as being the breadbasket of Europe, basically. If you take the maximum capacity in terms of producing grain and other foodstuffs, and where it's operating now, how far off of the maximum are we?
Oh, in Ukraine, they're down probably 50%. I mean, you can measure it a lot of different ways, but, if you did not have the Black Sea Initiative still operating, which it's sluggish, but it's operating, you'd see a lot bigger problems than we see today. And in terms of the long-term implications, you have to think about, you can't just rebuild all the value chains overnight. And so you start from one end to the other, and you have to look at what investment is it going to take to bring that back. And then one of the really big issues in agriculture in Ukraine is the mining. There's landmines that are estimated to be across almost 30% of the Ukraine area. And that can take years. I mean, we're very involved in it, and we hope that we can cut it back to a much lesser time frame. But demining is a tough business, so that affects their productivity for a long time, because obviously you can't farm until the fields are cleared.
What about sort of the environmental impact? I mean, he mentions it as being the breadbasket of the world. There's a reason why it was a breadbasket of the world, because of just how fertile the land there, the soil there was for centuries.
Well, so they have this. They have soil. It's called Trinum soil, and they have 65% of their arable land is made up of this soil. It's the best soil in the world, and it's one of the reasons why they can produce what they do. Landmines are going to have some contamination effect on that. Clearing the landmines in some areas, depending on what kind of landmines they are, you'll be able to get back to productivity pretty quickly. And then the other issue is there's hundreds and hundreds of acres, thousands of hectares that have been affected by shelling. So you can look at a 40-acre field, and you can see 50 to 60, holes blown out from shells. That is really difficult to fix. And when you do fix it, there's only minimal mitigation that you can do to the soil, the damage that you do to the soil when you fix it. So it's hard to estimate how much damage is done and how long it's going to take to come back. But there'll be some environmental damage. There's no question about it.
Where's the money going to come from? How much interest do you think there's going to be by outside investors, foreign investors, when the war ends and there is more of a talk about how do you rebuild this economy?
I'm hoping there's a lot of interest, but you don't really know that until the time comes. And Ukraine is such an important country in terms of agricultural productivity, but it's also, I think, an important country to Europe in the future. And so I think if it's looked at, the big picture and long term, then there should be the money to invest. But it's going to take, billions of dollars to help Ukraine recover across a broad spectrum of businesses and agriculture and shipping and a lot of things. So I mean, I think it'll be there, and I hope it's there.
What are the ripple effects of what we've seen so far in Ukraine when it comes to agricultural products? I know when this first started, there was a lot of concern, for example, about sub-Saharan Africa really having shortages, not only because of grain, but also some fertilizer issues coming out of Russia. What are we seeing?
Well, last year, WFP, World Food Program, put out a few different numbers, and they said that 70 to 100 million people were pushed to the brink of starvation. That's a lot of people. And then they also put out some statistics about Eastern Africa, where the basic cost of your food basket for a family went up 55%. You know, the three of us can walk in a supermarket here somewhere. We're going to have access to the food. We might pay more, but we can buy it. This is going to affect billions of people in different ways. But the price of food has been pushed up, and it's not, I mean, as long as Ukraine's at war and until some of the productivity comes back, you're not going to see those prices go back to normal. And then the other question is access to food. And so you have both of these issues. And when you bring up Africa, you have to also think about the fact that a lot of these people that are going to have trouble accessing food and affording food, they are in areas that are already not very stable or maybe have some conflict. So, you know, I've always said food is power. And so this gives those people who are in power in Africa another way to try to push their own agenda or to control more people. And food is absolutely critical at the end of the day. If you can't control that, if the government can't feed people, you're going to have problems.
Howard, as you suggest, this is fundamentally a humanitarian issue, but it's also an economic issue. When you have higher food prices, typically the markets might respond by more investment being put into places who could produce some of the agricultural products that we're not seeing now. Are we seeing that? Is there increased investment in some parts of the world?
It's not easy to do that. First of all, you can't do it in a year and you can't do it in 2 years. You're talking about large infrastructure investments. You're talking about companies that have to get up and running if they're going to provide fertilizers and seeds and all the other inputs. You're talking about machinery that has to be in place. And that takes years. And you can't do it quickly. And then a lot of companies are not going to invest over a year of war. You know, what happens the next year and what happens the following year and what happens when Ukraine comes out of it. So it's not easy to go somewhere else and make an investment and say we're going to make up for what we lost in Ukraine. You can't really do it.
What's the future, though? Is it just about growing more, or is it just maybe about growing things in a more efficient manner?
Well, the first thing is it depends on how the war ends. I mean, you know, and where it ends in terms of who has occupation of what territory and who can bring that back the quickest. I don't think, you know, if you're looking at the future and if Russia has more territory, you're going to see lower productivity. I mean, Russia is not going to make the investment. They don't farm in a way that most commercial farmers are going to farm. Ukraine was on the path. I mean, if you start looking, I mean, in the top 5, they were hitting the top exporters of barley, wheat, corn, soybeans. Number 1 exporter of sunflower oil. I mean, they were. If you look at their trend yields, they were just getting better and better, and they still have a lot of room to improve post-war. And we'll stay engaged in that. I mean, we want to be involved in that. But I think, you know, it's very hard to predict the future. But I think if Ukraine gets all the occupied territory back, they get the demining addressed, there'll be some investment in agriculture. There's a reason to invest in Ukraine after the war.
After the war. Several of your answers really have gone to after the war.
Yeah.
You just got back, as I say, a week ago. You've been there 7 times. You've been to the front lines. You have perspective that a lot of us lack. What's it going to take to end this war?
Well, the United States has to start allowing Ukraine, or helping Ukraine, I should say, helping Ukraine fight it the way they would fight it. I mean, if we were fighting this war, we would have control of the airspace. We would be using longer-range artillery to take out the supply lines to Russia. And the longer-range artillery isn't meant to go into Russia. It's in occupied Ukraine territory, and I think you have to keep that in mind. I mean, I met probably a dozen different commanders, from the commander of brigades down to the commander of tank crews, and every one of them said, we are completely handicapped because we can't fight Russia with the distance that we need to fight them. And of course, you know, they have one Black Hawk, one single Black Hawk in their air fleet. I mean, they don't have the air support that they need, and they also have a terribly difficult time, and this is really where I say it's a war on civilians, but they have a terribly difficult time defending themselves from the attacks that Russia is dropping in all the time and killing civilians. And so, you know, we have to step it up. Europe has to step it up, and we have to start talking about a Ukraine victory, and we have to start talking about how Ukraine wins this war instead of, like, you know, this week we're not going to give you that, and then next week, well, maybe we'll give you this. And we're not giving it to them at the speed and at the and also we're not giving them what they need to win the war. So I mean, we have to start thinking about this differently. We need a strategy that Ukraine can win.